I've been plagued for a few months now that some jitter and jello would not go away from my Foxwhoop. And I had to find out on a day where I was covering an event. Like, a little bit of shakiness should be fine, but I ran through gyro flow and it made this weird jello effect that was killing the footage. It was literally unusable. So the past few months I've been exploring the 2.5-inch Cinewhoops, and we'll look through the components as well as the thrust to weight ratio and how it relates to jello and all that. If everything's okay, then we look at the soft mount and what options we can do, especially with 3D printing. Now firstly, we look at frame choice. The Foxwhoop 25, as we see by the design, has the GoPro mount on top of the carbon fiber. And because it's a hard mount, all the vibrations will transfer up directly towards the action camera. Now if you can afford it, I would recommend the GapRC Cinewhoop 25. This is the mount where the camera goes on top of. And there are these rubber balls or grommets separating this plate from the rest of the frame. So these act as a shock absorber so the vibrations do not reach the camera. So besides the frame, the other components of the quad, we'll just quickly run through them. The first easy thing you can change is the propeller. Sometimes the propeller might scratch the propeller guards, or during a landing it might scratch a little. So if possible, just replace all the propellers and go for another flight and check it out. If not, you can take a look at the motors. Sometimes the motors might bend in a crash. A motor problem is something you could probably hear if it's in the air and you hear a weird fluttering noise or something. And finally, the AIO. What I've found is that BL Heli S ESCs tend to work better. So if you can get an AIO with a BL Heli S instead of a BL Heli 32 and install Bluejay on it, that might do you better, especially in flight performance and longer flight times. And the software thing we can look at is a pit tune. Most of the time you could just run the default pit tunes on Betaflight, or even one of the presets on the presets tab. Or if you want to try, you could also download the CLI of official products. For example, if you go to the GapRC official website, to the support, downloads, and let's just say the Cinewhoop 25, you can see there's a CLI over here. Go over to one of the CLIs. You just copy from the pit profile all the way to the rate profile. Open Betaflight, and you can go over to CLI. You can paste the commands here, hit enter, type in save, and hit enter as well. So you can give that a shot if you want something that's a copy and paste of someone's homework, if you're not ready to go into pit tuning just yet. But if you have the time, just go over to Chris Rosser's video or something like that to learn the black box tuning process. Now also for the action camera, definitely try putting ND filters whenever you can. An ND filter would lessen the amount of shutter speed. GoPro tends to blend the footage a little bit in together, meaning that the jitters and jellos become a little bit lesser. In my testing, as long as the conditions are right, meaning that in this bright scenario I put an ND filter on, it just smooths everything out. Or in contrast, if I were to fly it at a night environment or with low sun, it's probably going to perform as well, because the ND is just to bring down the shutter speed, and at lower light conditions where the sun is not shining through, you probably won't see these jitters or jello as well. The next big consideration is thrust to weight ratio. It is the relation of how much thrust the quad can produce versus the weight that it's trying to carry. Now initially I was flying the nameless RC naked GoPro, which is mostly injection molded plastic. Something went wrong with my quad and it kind of flipped out on arming. And this freaking thing bent the whole chip, okay? So that's why I shifted to the GapRC. I can show you here. It's an aluminum case, which has survived so much mishap with me so far. Now, what happened with this shift is that the nameless RC is coming in at 9 grams for only the injection molded plastic without the components, while the GapRC is coming in at 46.7 grams without the chips and all that. This difference in weight threw the thrust to weight ratio off balance, and basically my quad became underpowered. So to tip the scale back in balance, you could maybe replace your motors with something of a higher kV. Therefore, your 4S batteries could produce a little bit more thrust with what is given. Or if you can afford it, maybe change to 6S packs. But if you do that, you gotta make sure that your electronics are rated for 6S, as well as your motor KV needs to be appropriately measured or limited in beta flight. Now let's talk a little bit about soft mounting. I've tried many different designs. PETG that connects directly to the Foxwhoop itself, a TPU printed mount with just 4 pillars towards the base and the action camera mount on top, and something I downloaded from Thingiverse. This is printed in PETG, so it's hard on top, but it utilizes the gummies as the shock absorbers. And you need to buy these rubber balls separately online for the thing to work. And I have a sort of a catapult test and a sort of a shaky test and how the action camera moves in relations to it. You see the hard mount, the camera moves with the whole quad itself. Wind that's coming in, the pit corrections, or even the motor vibrations is going to fully be read by the GoPro itself. While we see the TPU mount, there is a little bit of flex from the head there, but what's going on inside the TPU is that some of the shock is being absorbed. Especially when it comes to something like a motor vibration, it's so minuscule that I don't think it will be picked up by the camera on slow motion. And over here with the rubber balls, you can see the dampening clearly happening. There's a lot of compensation. Even the big movements and the small movements might not be reaching the GoPro as much. So I'm going to show you these camera rigs in action in a flight. I'm going to be exaggerating the results a little bit by not using an ND filter so that it'll bring out the Jello a little bit more. For the hard mount, it's very clear. We can see it's shaking like crazy. It's not giving me what I want. If I shoot something with this, it's probably unusable footage. While for the TPU pole style design, it's doing pretty well, I'd say. And there is a little bit of jitters that you can see here and there, but majority of the footage seems to be intact. And finally is this grommet slash rubber ball slash that is doing a great job in terms of removing all of the shakes. Now the sun did set a little bit because this thing takes so damn long to set up for the first time, but I'm not seeing any give of Jello whatsoever. This is perfect. But such a big advantage comes at a cost. I did notice that my flight times was decreasing quite a little bit. And what's happening is because the whole rig is just like swinging everywhere. So with that movement, the pit loop recognizes this and is correcting a little bit with the speed of the motors. So it takes more effort for the motors to fight the wind as well as the heavy ass GoPro on top that's swinging about. And that's because I missed a step from the 3D printed file listing. In the Thingiverse file, it says to get 4 15mm M3 nylon screws with nuts at the other end. But I don't have any nylon screws, so I substituted with some M3 metal screws and nylon nuts. So the first flight I'll be doing is with the gummy without any screws. This is the footage from my goggles. One thing you can notice is that there's a voltage drop a little bit after takeoff. And that's probably the motors using a bit more power to manage the shakiness of the quad. Like you can see in this footage, the Runcam Wasp footage is also very shaky. And that's because it's attached to the same plate as the GoPro mount and it's swinging. And at around the 2-minute 50-second mark, I get a low battery warning. And I measured the voltage of the battery after the flight and it stables down to a 3.75 after landing, which is not bad, but the low battery warning really discourages me from continuing flying. And this next flight is the gummies are locked with the metal screws as well as the nylon nuts at the end. Now there's a noticeably less FPV camera shaking, meaning that the rig is sitting a bit in place, and therefore the motors are not working as hard, so there's less of a voltage drop during the flight. I ended up landing at 3 minutes with no battery low warnings whatsoever. And the battery reading is about 3.8 per cell average. But that also means that the quad still has energy left to spare and there's no low battery warning like panicking me to land or something. And just so you're assured, I'll show you the action camera footage. Adding these screws did not affect the jitters, so feel free to put them on for just better performance from your quad. So this soft mount is the savior of my 6 months of anguishing over jittery and Jello-y footage. I hope I managed to help you to get out of Jello hell as well. Thanks for watching.